In a YouTube channel that explores the world's great rivers and lakes, it would be remiss of me not to talk about a system that is actually called great. I'm a bit surprised that I've taken this long to get to this system, but for many of you, at long last, here it is. This is the opening video in which we will be exploring the North America's Great Lakes. If we were to shoot into space on one of the expensive space tourist adventures and look down at the continental land masses of the world, North America would show up as green in the east and tannish brown in the west. Those are primarily vegetation differences. However, if we look a bit east of the middle of the continent, we see these bodies of water that stand out so distinctly that they cannot help but catch the eye. When we zoom in on this area, we find massive lakes that appear to be almost interlocking. Each of these lakes is massive unto itself, but when taken together they become great. In fact, they are so great that Europeans, in a move of unlimited creativity, called this chain of huge lakes the Great Lakes. Moving from west to east, we start with Lake Superior. Below Lake Superior, we have Lake Michigan. Moving east of Lake Michigan and connected by a waterway, we enter Lake Huron. We then jump a bit south and east and enter into Lake Erie. Erie? Wait a minute, that is familiar. Didn't we do a video on the Erie Canal? Maybe we should go back and see that. And then last, but certainly not least, we have Lake Ontario. For those of you who like more on the satellite image for reference, here are the Great Lakes with some major cities identified. The system moves from Duluth in Minnesota through Sault Ste. Marie into Lake Huron. Lake Michigan drains from Chicago through the Mackinac Straits to Lake Huron as well. Lake Huron drains between Detroit, Michigan and Windsor, Ontario into Lake Erie. Lake Erie flows west to Buffalo where it drains into the Niagara River, meeting Toronto on Lake Ontario. As you can tell from the city descriptions, the Great Lakes share boundaries with many states, and they are also divided between Canada and the United States. The Great Lakes drains a pretty large land area, although in many areas, it's not that far between the watershed boundary and the lake to which it drains. Within the natural watershed of the Great Lakes Basin, the drainage point is the St. Lawrence River, which flows northeast to the Gulf of St. Lawrence and winds up in the Atlantic Ocean. Because of the opportunities for trade along the Great Lakes and the potential for substantial economic development to the region, and for those who would serve the region, the Erie Canal was built to connect the Great Lakes with cities along the Hudson, including New York City. So here we have a constructed outlet in which humans have redirected a portion of the lake basin drainage through the Hudson River. In this case, it was for direct commercial development. While the Erie Canal was built for commercial transportation, we have another constructed outlet from the Great Lakes through the city of Chicago. In this case, we have an improved river that was modified to run backwards and carry sanitary waste from Chicago away from Lake Michigan into the Mississippi River Basin. In this case, we are using the force of the lakes to carry human sewage out of the basin so that it does not foul the city's water intake. Both the Erie Canal and the Chicago sanitary canals are significant human-constructed projects that led to moving water from the basin through an artificial outlet. As we will see in our individual lake videos, there are many other constructed features that have worked to change how water moves through the larger system. If we're going to look at canals for transportation, we should also look at the ships that use the Great Lakes for exploration, freight, and passenger travel. One of the first European ships on the lake was the Griffin. That was an exploration vessel. We then moved from ships powered by sail to ships powered by steam, which led to a greater regularity in shipping and increased speeds. Today we have our Great Lakes freighters that carry substantial cargo across the Great Lakes, including iron and agricultural products, to the ocean and beyond. If we're going to talk about a series of massive lakes that saw substantial freight and passenger shipping, the Great Lakes has its own inventory of ships that have disappeared beneath the waves. Some of these wrecks are up close to the shore, while others are in much deeper water, only visible to deep diving vessels. Many are still lost to this day, having sunk from unknown causes in unknown areas, not having yet been found. The image of shipwrecks on a lake is a bit jarring. As we're looking at the lakes, the first image that often comes to mind is one of quiet, peaceful waters, with waves gently lapping at the shoreline. This is so nice and relaxing, and it must be peaceful living along these placid shores. But before we buy our homes along the Great Lakes, the weather does change, with gales that produce massive waves. These storms can get so severe that they can sink the great freighters we talked about earlier. There's been more than a few sailors who were caught unawares by the November gale and had to beat a hasty flight to a safe harbor. Unfortunately, some of them did not make it. And lest we forget, these lakes lie in the northern climate. So not only are there November gales, but there are harsh winters in which the lakes do occasionally freeze over. Oh, and lake effect snowfalls. These storms can quickly dump feet of snow on those cities that lie adjacent to and inland from some of these massive bodies of water that pump moisture into the air. When we think about the Great Lakes, not only are they great in size, but they are also great in weather. The Great Lakes are one of the largest sources of fresh water on the planet. In many areas of the lakes, the water quality is incredible, allowing one to see several meters down to the rocky bottom. This is one reason that shipwrecks can be so haunting. One moment, a rocky bottom, the next, an almost perfectly preserved ship sitting upright. It gives me the shivers when I think back to the time my partner and I did a shipwreck cruise on Lake Superior, and we floated over the first ship that just appeared through the waters, almost as if waiting for us to give a warning of the dangers in these waters. However, the water quality in all of the lakes is not so clear. There are some portions of the lakes that are polluted by surface water, which leads to algae blooms and other hazardous materials being deposited in the water. Urban development along some of the lakes has been and is a real problem. In some cases, the pollution loading can produce algae blooms that can be seen from satellites. You know, it's never good when your algae bloom can be seen from space. Probably not a good selling point for alien tourists. Speaking about the land that surrounds the Great Lakes, we have a variety of uses. In some parts of the basin, we have second-growth forests that have come in following the great logging operations at the beginning of the 20th century. These second-growth forests cover a stark rocky terrain that makes it a beautiful area for camping and fishing. In other areas of the basin, we have very productive farmlands that blanket the rolling lands. In some cases, the runoff from these farms causes in-lake water quality problems, as we discussed previously. But there are efforts to do things to improve farming practices so that we can reduce the harm to the lakes and those who use them. There are also great cities that lie along the shores of the lakes. As this region was open to European development, many of these great cities became hubs for transportation and manufacturing. As with the farmed areas, these cities are tremendous assets to the region, but also present water quality challenges that are currently being addressed to ensure the lakes stay in a healthy condition into the future. Through most of this presentation, I spoke about European settlement. However, these lakes were the homelands of many Native American and First Nation communities. These tribes lived with the land and modified the environment to support themselves while they worked to support the land. These people developed a rich story related to their deeply personal connection with and relationship to the lakes and lived off the abundance of the region. While the original settlers of the land struggled with European immigrants, they did not disappear. Our indigenous communities still live within the region and continue their relationship with the land and the water, maintaining and building their connections to their natural resource family members. As we think about the Great Lakes, we need to remember that there are communities that have been there from time immemorial and continue to serve as guardians of today's resources. So there we have it, our introduction to the Great Lakes video series. In the next few videos, I'll be working through the Great Lakes running from Superior to Michigan and on to Huron, flowing downstream into Erie before winding up in Ontario. I hope that you stick with me through our voyage. On the way, we're going to take a few quick takes to special things that happened around the lakes. Once we are done with our voyage, our hands will be calloused and our backs sore, but we will come away with an understanding for why these lakes are called Great.